Hopefully, this is the sound of my voice. Hello, good morning. Hopefully people can hear me. It's very quiet in here with my headphones on, but I'll just talk some nonsense while people get in and get settled. I hope everybody's surviving all this lockdown. I seem to be doing okay. I have musical equipment and access to entertainment, and there's always Star Trek Deep Space Nine to watch again, so that's good. In my opinion, the finest Star Trek series, but I don't want to be making too controversial statements. Lovely, so hopefully everybody can see the screen. Morning Alex, morning Craig, morning Katrina. I was actually just listening to morning Kim. Was just listening to a piece of music that Alex sent me over that he made. Bit of noise on the mic. Let me just check. I'm going with a slightly different setup today, although I might just be able to go back to how I was. I'm in a slightly different place today. Let me just switch back to maybe just using my computer mic for this, because it seems to handle it a little bit better. Hey. Craig, I'm not a fan of the new films. I didn't like them. Too much action, not enough. Just taking an ambassador to speak to somebody else. I think that was solid Star Trek. It was just taking an ambassador to meet someone. Good times. So I have switched my microphone a little bit, and hopefully that might sound a little bit better for you. Excellent, that's just what I wanted to hear. You may have noticed there's a little link at the bottom of the screen. Hopefully you can find that. It's a very small zip file. It's only about 2 or 3 megabytes, just with a few little audio files. So the idea is that if you go to that link, it'll take you to a Dropbox page, and there's a wee download link in the top right. Download that file and just unzip the folder to somewhere you can find it. Just put it somewhere on your desktop or just somewhere, as long as you know where you can find it again. That's all good. I'm not going to tell you how to arrange the files on your computer. You can do your own thing with that, as long as you unzip it somewhere you can find it again. So I think I'll start today with just a very quick recap on some of the things we did last week. Also, I'm going to just add in a couple of probably fairly important things that I didn't really cover last week that I really should have. Morning Audrey, morning John. So now let's also make sure that hopefully, I think that Ableton sound should be coming through for everybody. Good. Excuse me. Excellent. So I'm just going to start off by doing a quick recap. I'm just going to start with a whole new song here. I'm going to make that bit go away so I've got a bit more space. And I'm just going to find a drum kit, just something to start with. I'm probably going to replace the drum kit later with some sounds that we're going to make today. I think my intention today is to show a little bit more of how to record sound into Ableton. don't want to spend too much time on that because I appreciate that maybe not everybody has a setup with an audio interface and a mic and things like that. But I'll cover a little bit of that because that's definitely something that's quite important if you want to record in an instrument, your guitar, your voice, your whatever. That's definitely something people are going to want to know. And then I'd quite like to cover ways of kind of making your own synth sounds and your own drum sounds. So instead of using the preset sounds that we were using last week, I'd like to show you some ways to just take some sampled sound, some recorded sound, and sort of manipulating it into something that becomes an instrument that you can play. And I'm not quite sure how long today's will last. I'll probably aim to finish at 1. I haven't really worked out how long what I'm going to teach lasts, so I think we'll find that out as we go. So I'm going to start a bit like last week. I'm actually just going to find a drum kit, and I'm going to drag it onto this first track, give it a minute to load, and I'm going to double click in a little empty cell here to make a little part. I'm going to click this little headphone guy on because I like it being on, because it means when I put in a note I can hear what it is. I'm not running my my little keyboard thing. What's it called? Keycaster. There you go. Excellent. And now you can see when I press keys, although it's slightly covered up by that link at the bottom, but I'm sure we can work around it. It'll be okay. So I've got a little drum kit. I've double clicked on that so that I'm editing here. I've clicked the little headphone so I can hear the notes, and I've also pressed, I've pressed B to flick into the little pencil mode. And I'm going to make a really boring drum beat because I'm probably going to replace it later. Let's make this bit a bit bigger. That's one thing to remember, is if you click the little sort of divider in the middle and your mouse turns into this little guy, you can make the bottom bit bigger if you're editing things, which is really useful. So I'm just going to make a little boring drum beat, about as boring as it gets. There we go. Oh, that's boring. There we go. I've bored myself already. And I'm just going to bring the mixer up. I'm going to turn it down a wee bit while I talk. So some things that I didn't cover last time. Well, this is quite an important one up here. This little number. That's the tempo. That's the speed of the whole project. You might have worked that out yourselves, but that's it. That's how fast it goes. So if I want to change it, well, one easy way: if you click on it and drag up and down, it changes the tempo. And it goes from about 0 to, I believe, 999. You can also, if you've clicked in that box and it's highlighted, you can also type in a number if you want. So if I type in 700, then things will get quite silly, and I think I'll stop that now. But I'm feeling a little tired today, so I'm just going to go a little slower, maybe 100 BPM. And then I'm just going to find another instrument to put in, maybe one of these instrument racks. I'm not really that bothered what it is. I just want to find something to put in a few chords so that I can play something along with it. And now I might have to run into my little problem with the fact that a lot of my sounds won't load, but I'll find something. Let's try dragging this one onto track 2, and that's one of the ones that won't load. You'll have to give me a little minute to find something that will work. How about this guy? Wonderful. Now I've actually got a little keyboard controller, or a little controller plugged in, so I'm just going to maybe find some little, find a couple of chords just to record in. That's a bit low. That's quite boring. I'll maybe record that. So while I'm at it, there's another little thing that's quite useful. This little button here is the metronome. If we, I'll just start everything playing again. If we click this on, you should hear a slightly obnoxious sounding metronome, but it's quite useful sometimes when you're recording, just to have something to really know what the tempo is, or if you're recording without any drum beat behind it. Well, metronome is very useful, and you can click it on and off, just like that. And no, that's not the shortcut for the metronome. And there are some options if you click on here, which we can work out. Oh, you can actually change the sound there. That's an option I've never actually found before. I just always stuck with the classic beep. That's great. So I'm just going to quickly record a little chord part, whatever it was, something like that. To click. Oh yeah. And I just clicked it just before the end of the bar there, so that it just loops round. I've got a wee part. I'm going to flick that metronome off because it's quite obnoxious. I'm going to turn this chord part down a little bit as well. And that's my opus for now. So actually, I'm going to take both these parts we've made. I'm just going to click. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to click the other one, so they're both selected. I'm going to click. I'm going to press the Tab key, so that it switches over into the arrangement view. I'm going to drop them down there. You'll see that they're sort of translucent. That's because it's actually still playing these clips in the session view. On the other view, all you need to do to fix that is click this back to arrangement button, and now it's just playing stuff that you've put down in the arrangement. So I'm just going to drag this drum beat out so that it just loops around for a good while, and I'm going to drag this chord part, this boring little chord part out so that it lasts for a while. I'm going to try and record some sort of sound over the top of it. I've got a microphone here which should be coming into Ableton. Now, if you want to record sound into Ableton, your computer may have a microphone built in. My Mac here does, and you can use that. It'll sound okay. If you want to get into it, really, you probably want some sort of audio interface. So that's a little box. A lot of them connect with just a USB, and it'll have some inputs and outputs. Usually, some outputs on jacks, like standard kind of guitar cables, or inputs on jacks. Quite often on XLR, which is what a lot of microphones use, and that'll let you get higher quality sound into your computer. So I've got a little mixer plugged in with this mic, I believe, going into it, and actually I can confirm that by you can actually see the input that's selected, and there is a little meter there which is lighting up. And I've got a feeling this mic might be a bit noisy today, but I'm not overly bothered today about the quality of the sound I'm recording. I just want to show you some techniques for recording. So if I'm just going to click at the beginning, you can see this hopefully you can see this very thin line that appears. That's just showing where it's going to play from. Now, if I enabled this track, click the little arm recording is what they call it, then this track is now armed for recording, and if I press record up here, it will start recording whatever noise I'm making, which at the moment is, and if I either just stop the whole thing by pressing stop, or stop recording, it'll stop recording. And now if we go back, we can hear me basically talking nonsense over this track here, and it will start recording whatever noise I'm making, which at the moment is, and if I
I see.
either just stop the whole thing by pressing stop, or Okay, I think there's a little bit of noise. There's something to do with my setup here that I think it's because I'm having to route sound to the streaming software as well. That's making some odd clicks and noises happen. We're kind of just going to ignore them today. I will continue as if they're not there. We'll pretend they're not there and that everything I'm recording sounds lovely. Please. So that's all well and good, but it's a more handy way to record, I find. Obviously there I was just pressing record when I wanted it to start record and pressing it off when I wanted it to stop. We can make the software handle that for us. So what I'm going to do, say that I want to just record over these 4 bars. Let's say I want to record over these 4 bars from 9 to 13. So I'm going to move this, this is the loop brace, and you can click in the middle to move it around. You can click at either side to make it bigger or smaller. And one of its primary functions is that if you click this button here, which looks like a little loop going round in itself, that means when you're playing it will just keep going round that. But it has, just to show you that it does that, play from the end, it'll loop back round. But the other handy thing that it can do, these little buttons on either side of the loop, they're punch in and punch out. So actually if I switch off the loop, I don't actually want it to loop round. If I switch on punch in and punch out, I'm going to run back from a bit further back. If I press record now, it's going to, you'll notice it's not recording, but when it reaches the start, it'll record while it's between those things, and then it'll stop. And that's quite useful if you want to just punch in one section. It's also worth noting if you leave the loop on, I'm just going to click on this part that I just recorded and delete it because it was probably rubbish. And I'm going to do the same again. Here we go. Oh no, I messed up, you see, but I'll do it again. And it'll actually just keep recording round and round in a loop. If I just drag this start back to there, if I actually drag it even further back, it's actually got both times that I did it. So that can be quite useful if you just want to loop round a few times. It might take you a few times if you're playing guitar or you're singing or whatever. It might take you a few times to get it right, and quite often the last time's the time you get it right. Now this is something we didn't necessarily cover. So Audrey, you're seeing input. So what you should need to do, this might depend a little on whether you are, whether you are on Mac or PC. If you go into the preferences for Ableton, which are not in there, they are, well, which are either in this menu or I believe will be at the bottom of the options menu if you're on Windows. It's been a little while. Then you have an audio input device and an audio output device. Mine are set up a bit strangely, but you should have one in audio input device that is the name of your audio interface, and the same for the audio output device. That's something I can't really get into specifics on because everybody's got a slightly different setup, but there should be something. If you have an interface with quite a few inputs, what you might also need to do is go into this. I think by default Ableton will just enable 2 inputs, just the first two inputs on any device. But if you go into this input config, I've only got two here, but there would be more things that would be grayed out, so that might be a 3 and 4 and a 5 and 6, and you can enable them as either mono or stereo inputs. And hopefully that means that basically on the track you can then click in this little menu, and this will look different depending on how many inputs you have. You get interfaces that have 27 inputs. Well, 27 is quite a strange number, but you get things that have 24 inputs, and then you would have quite a big list of inputs here. Also, if you click configure here, it will also bring up that page again. Hopefully this is all still working. I'm just going to listen to my wonderful voice, see if it sounded okay. It's a bit crunchy and weird. That's some problems I'm having here. And obviously I could go on to another track, make sure that I have selected the correct input, which in my case is input 1, that's where my mic is plugged into. I will record enable this track, and just do that. I've got all the settings for punch in and punch out the same. That's a good question there from, I'm assuming, Joe. These buttons here, the in, auto and off, this is your record monitoring. So this basically this sets whether or not you hear what you're recording while you're recording it. There are various reasons. I've left mine off just because I don't want to hear it, to be honest. I don't want to hear it. But there are three options. Off means it just won't hear it. You'll only hear it when you play it back. Auto means that you won't hear it normally, but you will when it's recording. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you will when it's record enabled. I'm getting this crunchy noise, but we're just going to ignore it. So now that I won't be able to hear myself, I'm just going to record another harmony or something. Press stop, and actually it looped round again there, but if you can just click on where the little split is and drag it back to the beginning, and I didn't sing that very well, but it's kind of awful, but that's the very basics of how you can record in audio. I feel like a lot of the setup part is a little bit sort of specific to each person's setup. I'm just going to click this button. I'm just going to switch off the record enable on this track, just because that will, yeah, there we go. That will stop me from hearing that nasty crunchy noise through there. A couple more things you can do in terms of recording audio. You can, if you have multiple things plugged in, say you have an interface where you have your guitar plugged into one of the inputs and your mic, and you want to record them both at once. I'm going to pretend that I have this, the input 2, I had something else plugged in. I actually don't, but if we imagine that number 1, I had my voice plugged in. Also worth noting that good practice, which I'm very bad at, you can rename your tracks. So if I right click and say rename, maybe I would call this voice 1, and maybe I would call this one guitar if it was going to be a guitar. If I want to record both tracks at once, the normal behaviour in Ableton is that if you record enable a track, it stops the other tracks from being record enabled, which can trip people up a little bit. But actually, if you hold down shift while you're doing it, it's no longer shift. If you hold down command or control, sorry, some of these key commands I've forgotten what they actually are because my hands fall on them naturally. So that allows you, if you do it while you're holding down control, that lets you arm multiple tracks for recording. So that could be anything up to, you could have an interface with lots of mics on a drum kit and on bass and guitar and vocals and record. If you had an interface with enough inputs, then you could be recording a whole band into this. Hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of a grounding in in just the basics of recording in some sound. Hopefully people are following that. It's fairly simple. Much like the MIDI parts, you can also, you can copy and paste stuff. If if I click on this and hold down Alt while dragging it, it'll copy and paste it. And if you want, you can also get in quite, if you're working with audio, if you click on the sort of the boxy part, the coloured part, it'll just select the whole thing. But if you're in the part with the waveform below here, it is possible to click and drag to select parts, and you could you can move things. You can select and then move it around if I decided that I wanted to. That's terrible. You can actually, if you zoom in by moving the mouse up to the top, why do some of them have little clocks on them? I think the difference is, now this is a question that I think it's when they're MIDI tracks, but I actually could be wrong. I think that's the difference, is it's ones that are MIDI tracks. I think it might be to do with automatic arming. It is a good question, and I've never bothered to find out the answer. If you just as a thing, it is possible if you want to get down and start doing some serious editing, you can zoom in quite far if you want to make strange kind of glitch music. Maybe I want to zoom in really far on this bar. I'm just going to cut a tiny bit of this sound, tiny bit, and I'm going to just do this. If you just drag away and drop it again, it separates that little part, which is quite useful. And I'm just going to copy, and I'm going to drag over all of this. I'm going to Control C, paste it again. And actually, the easier way to do that is Command D. And that's a bit of a mess, but you can do weird things like, you can copy audio about, you can move it around, you can edit it for timing if you want to. That is one of the main things you can do. But generally you can record in some sounds. So was what a Star Trek joke? I don't know. But I'm going to take all this nonsense that I've recorded here, or actually, well, I'm gonna, I'm gonna ignore these things for now. But what I'm gonna do, I think that's the basics of recording in audio. A lot of that then just comes down to setting a decent input level, which would be usually your audio interface will have a gain control that you can, increase the level of the input that's coming in. And that all kind of depends a little bit on the source, what you're actually recording. But well, partly because I wasn't sure whether everybody would have a microphone or have access to something they could record, and I wanted to deal with some sort of interesting manipulation of sound today. I made a little pack for everyone to download. Hopefully, people have got that. There is somewhere just below my mouse pointer, there's a little link to a little zip file, and You can actually just, I don't know if I've got anything open. You can drag things in, drag files in directly from the Finder on Mac or the Explorer in Windows, but it's quite an easy way of finding them. You know, if you have folders that you're going to put sounds in and use quite often, you can add them into the little library on the left of Ableton, and the way that you do that is if you in the left column, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a little add folder, and if you click on that, it'll bring up your thing, and you just have to navigate. In my case, I think I have this on my desktop. I think I have that is my folder that has all those files that we got before, and that will make it appear here. So this is our online workshop files. I just went around the house and recorded some noises, but mainly because I wanted to show you how you can use the sampler in Ableton. So I'm just going to mute these two tracks here. I'm going to create a new MIDI track. I'm going to go to instruments like we did before, but instead of adding in, I'm just going to close all these little things up. Instead of adding in one of these presets, I'm going to add in this device called Simpler, which is a sampler. It's a simple sampler, although it is actually a very powerful sampler. And you can actually drag. You'll notice there's an empty box in the middle, a big empty box, and it says drop sample here. And you can drop samples from. You can, for instance, the folder that we made before. You know, I could drop this sample. This if you actually click, it'll audition things. This is just my horrible voice yesterday. If you press space, it'll stop playing it back. But if we have this track, arms now, what should I do? And I've got this keyboard switched off. But yeah, I have a little keyboard plugged in. So basically, it's making an instrument out of one sample. And you can see the playhead. You can actually see. I think that is the. Oh yeah, that's the. I'm trying to find the note where it plays it back. Excuse me. That's it playing it back at the original pitch. And if you how this works, it's very simple. If you play in a note that's higher, then it just plays back the sample faster. Now you'll notice that means the higher up you get, the shorter it gets, and that's quite annoying. If I want to make a little instrument that I can play, I'd rather it didn't do that. So, well, there's a little button here that says loop. So let's click loop and see what happens. So now if you hold down the key, it'll loop round and round the sample. Which is quite good, but that sounds a bit wonky at the moment. So there's a few different controls here that change. Well, even if you don't have loop turned on, you have a parameter for just when it starts playing. So you can do that, and then now it's only playing this tiny yellow bit, and that's not very nice either. So I'm just gonna put that right back to where it was, and then you have length, which is just basically how much of it plays, which once again we can end up playing a really long thing. I might just leave those where they were, and I'm going to switch this loop back on again, and then this loop here, this is how long of a loop it will play, and I quite like often finding a nice short one. And you can just experiment until you find something that sounds alright. And then this fade thing does a little, it basically fades the start and the end of the loop together so that it can be a bit smoother. And now we get something, you know, that's a lot more usable. Out of the horrible sound of my voice. But yeah, so that's quite a nice start to that. But I thought I would use this as an opportunity to talk about synthesis. I'm teaching this on Ableton Live Intro, which has quite a limited amount of instruments in it. In fact, really the only instruments it have are ones that basically play back samples, which aren't necessarily there isn't a sort of analog synthesizer instrument in it. But we can make it, but we can make it act like an analog synthesizer. So if everybody's found managed to find the things that the little download pack that I got, I'm actually just going to click on this instrument, delete it, and just load in that simpler again. I just want it to be a totally blank one that I've not done anything to. Now, an analog synthesizer would have the thing that starts off making the sound of an analog synthesizer is what's called an oscillator, which is just a little, it's just a circuit that makes a constantly looping sort of sound, basically. And what I've done, I remembered that on my computer I have years ago, almost 20 years ago, I recorded just the very basic sounds of my old Korg MS-10 synthesizer. So there's 3 samples here called Korg MS-10 Pulse, Saw, and Sine. And if you hear when I preview them, you hear almost nothing. And that's because I have cut them so it is one single cycle of the waveform. The upshot of that is that if I drag that in, you can see this is an incredibly short sample. If I play that now, that's terrible. But this is I should have made these so they're a perfect loop. So if I click loop now, we've got ourselves a little synthesizer. And that gives me an opportunity to talk about the way that synthesizers allow you to shape the sound. So at the moment we have just a very simple, it's really just going to play back that sample. And pretty much when I press the key, it starts playing it. And when I let go, pretty much it stops playing it. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is this part here. And in fact, I'm going to click. There's 2 tabs at the top. You can click between sample, which is where we are now, where you can look at the sample. I'm done with the sample. Don't care about it anymore. And if you click over here to controls, first thing we're going to look at is this part here, which is what they call the amplitude envelope. Okay, amplitude is volume. So this is something that's going to control volume, and an envelope is what they call an envelope generator. Is something that can change something over time. And this one, it's called the amplitude envelope. It's going to change the volume over time. And these 4 controls here are related to this. So first one that's a good one to look at is called release. So if I turn the release up, okay, I'm holding down on the key, that's quite loud, but if I let go, if I let go of the key, the release is it's gonna hold on a little, and it's gonna, where's my arm? It's gonna taper down. So now we've got a slightly more pleasant sound with a little bit of release to it. Or if you want something really short, you can put it all the way down, and then you really just have, you know, press the key, makes the noise, let go of the key, stops making the noise immediately, but a bit more release, and then you've got something that fades out quite pleasantly. So that's what the release does. If we go to the beginning here, this is attack. So this is right at the start. As soon as you press the key, when the attack is set to nothing, it's just gonna straight in, full volume, no problem. Great. But we can make that a bit smoother if we turn up the attack. Oh, now it fades in quite pleasantly, and that's good. Obviously, depending on what sort of sound you're after, you might want it to come straight in, or you might want it to fade. But now that's much more of a sort of pleasant, quite nice for playing chords. And that's lovely. Now the middle part of the envelope is a little bit more difficult to, it's slightly more difficult to explain, but not really. It goes like this. When you press down the key, it will go through the attack, which you can see is a time, is a time in milliseconds. And that's how long it's going to take to ramp up to the top level. After that, you have two controls which are called decay and sustain. Decay is another time that's basically going to come back down the mountain again. You know, it's going to get quieter again. And sustain is like a plateau on the mountain. It's gonna take an amount of time, the decay time, to get down to a plateau, and the sustain is how far up the mountain that plateau is. And then once you let go of the key, then from wherever the plateau is in the sound, then the release is how long it then takes to just fall back down the rest of the mountain. It's best if I just demonstrate it by making some noises. I'm just going to turn the release and the attack down. So at the moment we're back to this. If I turn the sustain down to about halfway, you'll actually see the change. So now it's more like a plucked kind of sound. And if I turn this decay down more, it becomes much more. And if I turn the sustain down further, then and if you just mess around with these four controls, you can get quite a lot of changes just with. I'll give it more release. Yeah, so just with those few controls, we have a few things. How's everybody doing? Are people following along okay? Bearing in mind that there will be about a 30-second delay between me asking you this and you answering the question. I'm just gonna wait for a moment and see if anybody replies. Just gonna play with these controls and see if anybody says anything in the chat to let me know how we're doing. Hopefully you're all having so much fun that you're excellent. That's just what I want to hear. Okay, so that is the amplitude envelope. It affects the amplitude. It affects the volume of the sound over time, and it affects it essentially based on when it's all related to when you're pressing and releasing the key and what happens as a result. So yeah, so that allows us to change the volume over time, and you can get quite a lot of different changes with that. I'm just going to set this back to something quite boring. I'm just going to set the envelope back to just something just so that it's now back to really boring amplitude envelope, so that I can talk about another aspect of the synthesis that this sampler can do, which if we move our mouse over to here, this is what's called a filter, and by default it's what's called a low pass filter. So a filter is something that's gonna filter out some frequencies. Okay, so it's easier if I just let you hear it. And you can see you've got controls here for frequency and resonance. We'll talk about resonance in a minute. But basically, if I'm just going to turn this track down a little bit. So this is called a low pass filter. If I move this knob, you'll see it sweep down. And if I do it while I'm playing a note, you'll hear that the higher frequencies of the sound start to disappear until they're just about gone. In fact, there was some, and you can sweep that right back up. So that's a nice way of softening the sound, and you can sweep it around a little bit. And the other thing that the filter has is a control called resonance. If the frequency where we're sort of stopping, I mean, it's I like to think of it, you know, it's like a gate. They call it a low pass, so it means everything below that frequency can pass. It's like the troll on the bridge. Everything below wherever this knob is set to gets to be heard, and everything above it doesn't get to be heard. It's filtered out. That's what they mean. Oh, you can't see the filter part of the window. That's interesting. There is it's possible that if you can't see the filter part of the window, Rory, if there's some buttons here that say frequency and also say envelope. So maybe that you're seeing this part instead, and if you are, if you just click to where it says frequency here, I think that will. I think hopefully that is what your problem is there. But we'll see. So yeah, this is frequency. Now the resonance, what it does is it makes the filter, as well as filtering out sounds above the cutoff frequency, it also emphasizes, it pushes up the frequencies around the cutoff frequency. Basically, it makes it sound cool. I mean, you know, that's not to get too technical, but that's what it does. You can see that it puts a big hump in here. So if I turn this up, I mean, this is turned up quite far, and sweep it, here it kind of, you get that sort of. Oh, how can you sample to play and not the full thing? How do you sample to play and not the full? Rory, just to check again, are you in the? Are you in an older version? That's always a possibility. But even so, you should have the frequency and resonance controls. But also, there's the sample part, and then there's controls. So if you can still see the sample waveform, that means that you've got this tab to sample. You just need to click Controls, which gives you the rest of the controls. How do you get sample to play and not the full thing? It randomly stop. I'm not sure if I fully understand that question. If you can put it in a slightly different way, I might be able to help you with it. So we can see as we sweep the frequency with the resonance up, it sort of emphasizes some frequencies a bit more. You can turn it way up, and it can get quite a little bit distorted actually. So between the combinations of even just these few controls, a frequency, a resonance, and some controls for the for how the volume happens over time, you know, you can change the tone quite a lot. Was it the controls section then, Rory? Now, okay, I'm going to try talking about another aspect. So see how we have this envelope that changes volume over time. I mean, the best way to think about this envelope is it's like something that just kind of turns the volume knob for you automatically. There's also an envelope that can control the filter over time. So imagine it the same sort of idea, except that it is turning this filter knob for you over time. Now, in order to make it do anything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the filter down quite a lot, and now my sound doesn't make very much noise. So I've turned that down. You can hear it's all kind of. I'm going to turn this resonance control down a little as well. So yeah, it's not making very much noise because I've turned the filter way down and it's filtered out most of the sound, so we can't hear anything. Up here at the top, there's this amount control, which is basically how much this envelope is going to turn the frequency knob for you. I'm just going to turn it all the way up to the top. And now if I play a note, it's going to sound a little bit different because now there is this envelope that the default setting for it is that it's going to start right at the top and ramp down very quickly to the bottom, and that's about it, which is quite nice. But if you annoyingly they've put the controls for the volume one at the bottom and the filter one at the top, but you can also actually click on the points on the graph and move them around. So that's attack, which would make the fit as if you're turning the filter knob up slowly, which I can set to be much longer. That's 20 seconds. That's far too long. But so if I do that, then it's actually it's gonna turn that filter knob up over the course of 20 seconds. That's a bit long for me, but if I find a nice midpoint. And then once it gets to the top, it's going to ramp back down. I'm going to make that longer. So you can hear it going. And then let's see let go when we release. Maybe make it a bit longer. So you can even just between something that changes the volume over time, a filter that essentially changes the tone or the timbre of the sound, and then another of these envelope generators which can change the filter over time. You've got a lot of ways to shape this sound. Hopefully people are roughly following. Synthesis can be quite complex, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. Now, if people are roughly following these changes. The one other thing that I would that I would talk about in the synthesizer is this bit in the middle, which is called an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. I think a better way for me to think about it, instead of a low frequency oscillator, which sounds very technical, I would call it an automatic knob wiggler. if you imagine something that could just, you know, if you just want this frequency knob to get wiggled up and down like that, that's the sort of thing that an LFO exists for. It's just something that will generate a control signal that goes up and down, and use that to change something automatically. So its controls are all in the middle here. These 4 controls are the 4 things that it can control. These 4 parameters here. So you can make it automatically wiggle the volume. So if I turn it up on the volume, it's kind of harder to hear, but and this parameter in hertz is the rate. It's how fast it does it. So volume's okay. It'll make like a sort of tremolo effect. I'm just going to turn that back to 0. You can also make it affect the pitch of the sound, which will be more like a vibrato. So if you turn that up, I'm going to make it a little bit slower. That's like a vibrato sort of sound. And if you turn it way up, it starts to get quite a cool sound, but not maybe as musical. But sometimes just having that on a little is nice, and I can make it faster or slower. So maybe I'll just make that just a tiny little bit, maybe a little bit more. You can also make it affect this filter that we have here, and what it's going to do is it's going to be as if you're turning this frequency knob up and down. So if I make it affect the filter, then you can get just some nice. You can get various different things affecting the sound automatically, and you can make quite a nice queasy sort of sound there. And I can maybe put worth pointing out one little thing at the moment, because we've talked about how to load sounds, you know, how you can load the preset sounds and things like that. If I decide that actually I quite like this little sound that I've made, this button here at the top right of this device, and it's the same on pretty much every single device in Ableton, or every single one of the built-in devices in Ableton. This little looks like a little floppy disk. It's the international sign for save, and if you click on it and give my hard drive a minute to wake up, you'll see that up here it's made a little thing. It's highlighted. I can give it a name. I'm going to call it Gav Synth 1, and press return. And now that's a sound that I can recall in the future. There is a oh no, we had a YouTube crash. The wobbly bit. I'll happily go back to the wobbly bit. Always happy with the wobbly bit. Did I disappear for everybody, or was there a problem with the streaming? I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go back over stuff, obviously. The wobbly thing. This bit in the middle. Hopefully you can see it. Is the LFO, the low frequency oscillator, or as I prefer to call it, the automatic knob wiggler. I'm just going to set these things back to 0. So now this is basically how much the automatic knob wiggler wiggles these knobs. This is your choice. You have the filter knob that you can make it, which is just kind of the same as me going with my mouse. That's good. I'm glad if you're missing things, it's just because you're having fun. That's fine. So yeah, you can make it do that. You can make it affect the pitch of the note. You can change the speed at which it's doing so down here, which can actually get pretty fast or really quite slow. If you like those sort of, if you put that on the pitch quite slowly and maybe some decent amount of release, you can get those slightly boards of Canada. Yes, good question. There is a way of syncing the LFO with the tempo of the project. All you have to do is click this button here between. You can either have the speed of this LFO or automatic knob wiggler, as I like to call it, in hertz, which is just a measure of frequency of how fast it's going. Or if you click the little note button here, you can set the speed of it in terms of musical notes. So I'm just gonna go up here and get rid of quite a lot of this nonsense that I didn't really like, just so that I can listen to a drum beat. Come on. Oh yeah, there we go. Excuse me while I just delete my magnum opus. But if I play this drum beat, then get back to wherever my synth was. There it is. So I've set that to 1/4 note, and you can hear it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, wah, 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 wah. You set it to those kind of triplet sort of sounds. Maybe I'm going to go down the octave. And then suddenly we're getting into dubstep. So yeah, with not very many controls, you've got actually a world of possibility here. I suppose in some ways what I'm trying to do with this lesson is say, yeah, what I'm using is the cut down version, the really cut down version of Ableton that is missing an awful lot of the extra. The extra instruments and synthesizers and things that you get if you have the more the better version, the more expensive version of Ableton. But actually, the tools, even the really simple tools that they give you, can be like incredibly powerful. You can really do an awful lot with them. I guess the next thing I wanted to do, okay, so we've, so maybe you've got. I'm just going to have a quick 1 minute fiddle to get this to a sound that's not bad for now, and get to something else that we haven't dealt with yet. That's all right. Oh, I switched that off. There we go. There you are. That's how my sound is for now. That's fine. At this point, what I might do is just let you all have a couple of minutes to fiddle with your synth sounds. I'm going to go to the bathroom and refill my water. Let you all do that, and when I come back, we'll work on adding some audio effects to things and some of the things that you can do with that. So I'll be back in just a moment, and you keep playing. Ah, Rory, that's an excellent question. Hello, I'm back. I should reappear on your screens. That's a great question. There's a drop down with clean and some other options in the filter section, just beside the frequency and resonance knobs. Actually, there's a couple of different things which we can possibly look at there. What this actually is there's some different models. Essentially, you know, in old synthesizers, they would have there were lots of different designs for filters, and you know, in an old synthesizer, it was actually a bunch of electronic components, and there are various different ways of doing it, and they had, you know, different synthesizers would have different designs of filter, and you know, you don't need to know how they were designed or how the electronics works, but they all had a different tonal character. They all had, you know, they just sound a little bit different. They've given these names that might tell us actually what they are. I think they've a lot of these things where they're modelling old equipment, they don't give them the exact names because it might be some sort of copyright or trademark issue. I think OSR might be the filter from an Oberheim synthesizer. I'm very certain that MS2 will be a model of the filter from the Korg MS20, which is actually very similar to the synthesizer that I've sampled this tiny little snippet from, that we're using as the source for this. And actually, if you switch between them, you might hear a little bit of difference, especially when there's more resonance. You might hear a bit of difference in the way that it behaves, and also on these models, it adds a drive knob, which can just be a little bit of can add a little bit of distortion, which can actually add some interesting sounds. And if you really turn it up, it can start sounding quite warm and crunchy and quite nice. And you know, you can have a fiddle with these. Sometimes the difference on them's quite subtle, but can actually make some really nice sounds. Also worth noting, it's a very simple one, but the sometimes things, especially if you're using things like drive, which is essentially going to add volume, there is also a volume knob for the whole thing. Just, you know, imagine that was just the volume knob on your home keyboard. If you start doing things inside it that are making it really loud, you can always just turn it down again a bit. And you can you can mess around with these things. They just have kind of slightly different characteristics. That's one of the things Ableton did a really good job of, actually. Some of these filters really sound lovely. If I'm just to make sure I've covered things that might be interesting to you, I'm just going to set it so this envelope isn't doing anything anymore, just so that we can, I know, actually I'm just going to stop a lot of the wiggling and just go back. So I'm just going in and putting a lot of these parameters back to 0, just so that we get a more simple sound, so it's easier for me to demonstrate. So this was our really basic filter here that you can speed up and down. The other thing here that is these little pictures. The default setting there was what I called a low pass filter, which means that everything below the cut-off frequency, it's called, gets let through. There are some other types. Well, a high pass filter, which is basically the opposite. Everything above the everything above the cut-off frequency gets let through. So you can see that's with kind of everything allowed to be in, and you can start sweeping up, and that can be useful in other ways. That can be quite a nice thing if we drive it a bit. And there's a couple of other types that are like band pass, which is kind of like two filters. It only lets through sort of a bit in the middle. I don't use band passes very much, but you know, actually, is that a band pass? Or is it a band? There's some sort of band reject that cuts out a hole in the middle of the frequency response, which is also a slightly odd sound. But you know, it's all different choices that you have. And whatever the last one is, which is some sort of strange morphing filter. That's a continually variable filter that can morph between all the other types, which once again, cool, but we don't need to necessarily learn about that. And the last control you have, which is essentially, it's the slope of the filter. I'm not going to get too into that, but if you switch it between these two things, you'll see that it just slightly changes how quickly it gets rid of the frequencies. Really, it's just another sort of tonal thing. I'm going to switch this right back to just the low pass that we were on before, and get back, and just get my sound back to how I liked it. Switch this envelope. Get some of the old wiggling back on. And I'm rambling. So, this sounds alright. It's not bad. I think it could be a lot dreamier. And what we haven't touched on at all in this is any of the effects that you can add to stuff. And actually, even in live intro, you get quite an impressive array of effects. So we're going to go up to the browser part up here. We're going to choose the category audio effects, and there's a whole load of stuff in here. A whole load of really interesting stuff. You have things like, for instance, a delay effect. So if I just double click and I have whichever track I have selected, it's going to have a little think, and then it's going to add in this delay effect. And now you'll hear that if I play a note, it plays it again and again and again. And there are a ton of effects. I'm not maybe going to go into all of them in depth, but it's good to know. For instance, pretty much every effect will have a dry/wet control. If you don't know what that does, dry, what they call the dry signal, that would be no effect at all, no sound. Not no sound, but essentially the effect will be doing nothing. If I turn, where's my mouse gone? There we go. If I turn that all the way down, it's basically as if the effect isn't there. And if I turn it all the way up, you'll only hear the effect. So actually, if I press the key now, you don't actually hear the initial one because you're only hearing the delayed one. So quite often with things like delay, somewhere in the middle or somewhere a bit below, or whatever you fancy really. And this delay is actually tempo synced by default. So if and you can change the beat division. You can set it to be a different, to be in stereo and have a slightly different division on left and right. This little button in the middle links the two sides together, so they're always the same. But if you switch it off, you can have you also have on most delays you have what's called a feedback knob. Now when delays were analog, what this actually did was it would feed it into the delay, and the feedback knob would actually, once it had gone through the effect, would feed the affected sound back into the start of the chain. But really what it does is increase the amount of repeats. If I turn it up quite high, now me pressing the note once, I've only pressed it once, it'll go on for quite a while. And you also have a little a filter in the middle actually, which changes the tone of the delayed sounds and kind of makes it start to, you hear it starts to kind of fade away, kind of become smaller. That's and you also have a bit of a modulation. There's all sorts of controls. There are an awful lot of effects, but you know, you can kind of play with a lot of these things and just see for yourself what they do. It's also worth noting that all of the effects have a lot of presets if you want to use them, so you can just like we did with the hot swapping with the synth, you know, kind of synth sounds and whatever. You can click the little hot swap button here, and there will be some presets that just change the sound in hopefully interesting ways. Just going to make sure that I am getting message. Oh, no, that's fine. That's a happy message. Making sure nobody's sending me messages saying that everything's broken and it doesn't work. So yeah, you have some preset sounds, and if I load that one up, for instance, don't really know what that's going to sound like. Oh, that's quite a metallic sort of sound. Or there's one called Robot. That'll be fun. That's quite weird. Is there a way to reduce the pan to make it narrower? Actually, I think. Let me check. This is actually a slightly newer version of the delay than the one I'm used to. I actually use Ableton Live 9 a lot, and they've updated this delay. So actually, you want it to not be stereo. I think if you switch off ping pong, it will just switch it off. Whether you can actually change the panning of it on this one, I'm not actually sure. Also, a fun control that it has is this little infinite control, which is infinite feedback. If you switch that on, oh, that didn't do what I expected. Anyway, I don't want to. So delay is a very fun effect. You can. Obviously, I could leave that there. You can drag in effects. If you click and drag on them, you can see where they go. You can see where it puts a little line in there. If I want to put in, for instance, this flanger effect, I can do that. I might the little button at the top of any device, which actually used to look like a little on-off button, but they've just made it a nice yellow circle. If you click that, it actually just switches something off. Sound will still go through. So if I just want to hear what this flanger effect sounds like without the delay, and have a play with it. Not sure how I feel about that. Might just click on that and delete it. There's also some chorus. Maybe I'll try a chorus effect. There are a world of effects in here. You can combine them in all sorts of ways. Oh, I like the chorus. I'm going to make it all the way wet. Leave my delay in. Going to add in even a... I'll click add some reverb. So reverb effect would be like the sound of being in a large room, essentially. You know, like the big long sonorous echo you might get in a church. Once again, I might set the dry wet to just about halfway, but you know, you can change that to wherever you want. The decay time is how long the reverb goes on for. I'm just going to switch off these other effects so I can hear it on its own. You can hear that's a little bit of reverb. You can hear a little. This goes, something I quite like about the Ableton reverb is that it goes big. If you want to make some really ambient music, you can really get in there. I could get lost in the big reverbs quite quickly. There's an awful lot of effects in here. There's a filter actually, which a little bit like the filter that's in that sampler. Quite similar idea that can do a couple of other interesting things. There are delay. There are some equalizers actually, which you can use. Actually, this is one I've not really used before. The channel EQ. I see there's a simpler version of the nice EQ you get in other things. Is there a way to save a whole channel slip of effects? Yes, Chris, there absolutely is. It's not something I was necessarily going to cover, but I might as well show you, because it's actually one of the best things about Ableton, and it's a rabbit hole you can really fall down hard. But that's a lot of what I do with Ableton is using this functionality, which is called racks. So if I click on this synth, if I hold down, I believe, Shift, and then click on this EQ, which I haven't really done anything with, but anyway, and I'm going to click on this chorus, and I'm going to click on this delay, and I'm going to click on this reverb. I believe I could have actually done that by clicking on the first one, holding Shift, and clicking on the last one. That's selected all of those things. You can see they're lit up a little bit at the top. Going to right click, and I'm going to say group. What that does is it basically puts them all inside a little container, what they call an instrument rack, with a whole chain of stuff inside it. And if you go to the instrument rack side of it, which is the sort of container for everything, and save that, it'll save it as an instrument rack, which I could call Gav Synth Effects. And just to prove that I'm not lying to you, if I take that and delete it, and then go back to my browser, to instruments, I'm just going to make sure this really does appear where I think it does. I believe it saved it just there. I can double click, and that will load my entire ambient nonsense as a whole big rack. So yeah, you can make effects chains. You could also, if you want, if for instance I'm just gonna go onto another track here and put in some effects. There's actually nothing on this track, but I'm just going to put in some effects just to show you. If I put in this EQ and compressor and phaser, which obviously we need phaser on every track in the world, and select these and group them together. The only difference with this is it will be, if I click on this little button to see the name of it, it will be an audio effect rack, which, because it only contains effects, it doesn't contain any sort of instrument or anything. It's just a set of things to process things with. Yeah, so I'm not necessarily gonna cover all of the effects in depth, because I think that's something that's probably better for you all to just have time to play with them and see what they do. I think, I mean, for instance, some of the good ones. Actually, this one, if you're playing guitar or anything, very useful. There's just a tuner effect, really useful. Excellent thing, works pretty well. I use it for my live shows because I have one analog synth that goes out of tune a lot, and that's really useful. There is another one that I'm a big fan of that Ableton made is this saturator, which is a sort of distortion plugin that you can turn up the drive. I find with this effect the best way to use it is if you're turning up the drive, it will have a number. I will then turn down the output by roughly the amount that I've turned the drive up, and that kind of keeps the volume level okay, but then you can get quite distorted, and it has actually quite a few, a bit like the filters have different models of filters. This has sort of different models of how the distortion acts. That can get quite it can get quite nasty. Or you can just go back to something. Yeah, so yeah, that's the whole thing there. That's how you can use effects, which is, I think, is a whole rabbit hole you can get down. And for instance, if I was getting us there, you know, for our initial synth sound, the thing we were making there, we were just using a very short snippet of a synth sound just to get quite a normal sort of sound. But if I just make another thing here, you can chuck any sound into this sampler. What I didn't actually show you before, or I don't think I showed you before. I'm just going to very quickly. I think this sound is going to be a bit funny. Yes, this track is muted. Oh, that's very strange. I sound a bit like a Dalek, but I'm going to record some sound in anyway just to demonstrate something. I am a Dalek. Hello, I am a Dalek. I am a Dalek. Hello, I am a Dalek. That's a very horrible sound, but it's also got lots of effects on it. But yeah, you can drag sound into these samplers from just about anywhere. So I'm just going to delete this instrument and put a new sampler, a new simpler instrument on there. But I could just drag this. I could just drag this whole chunk of audio. You have to kind of hover over the track name for a minute, and it kind of does that little thing. And I can drop that whole minging sample that I just recorded onto this. Which is kind of horrible, but sometimes with things like this, that's a really, really horrible sound. But sometimes you can get quite interesting sounds out of things like this. You know, maybe I just want, you can use these little start and end markers to change how much of the sample you want to use. And maybe if I just find a little bit of it, I don't know if I'll get anything usable out of this horrible sound, but I'm going to give it my best shot, because it's nice to see what you can do with any sort of sound. Okay, that's quite horrible. But you know, it's okay, it's not the nicest sound in the world, but I'm going to give it a bit of drive, filter it. I don't love it. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't lie. But I'm just gonna delete that, put in a new one, and go back to that little folder that I gave everyone earlier. And for instance, I recorded the sound of me playing this melodica yesterday. Through quite a noisy microphone. It's probably not going to be the nicest sound, but I've lost my mouse pointer. But you know, I can take the sound of a melodica. Maybe I want it to kind of come in sooner. And that's, you know, it sounds a bit cheesy, but once again, we've got all these. I'm going to find a loop for it. Switch the loop on. While I make the loop. I'm going to use this fade. Thank you very much. Now we have coffee. Life is wonderful. yeah, I can mess with the controls that I've got here. And you know, I might get something out of it that I quite like. You can get really interesting sort of tonal things by throwing in things that you might not expect to be. Maybe I'll put in this me oohing instead. Suddenly using all those controls that we had before, I've got something that doesn't entirely sound like my voice. And I can put in a whole bunch of effects. Let's put in let's put in this weird bit reduction effect, which actually might, oh no, that just makes it sound horrible. Don't like it. I mean, you can never go that far along with loads of reverb. Yeah, really quickly you can get to something quite cool. So I think we'll go for about another half an hour. I think so we've learned how to mess about with these things and make something, make some sort of pitched instruments that you can play melodies or chords on. So I just wanted to look at the way that you can. Oh, coffee's wonderful. The way that you can also use samples as drum sounds. So what we're gonna do. I had that drum kit that I made at the beginning. I'm just gonna delete that track entirely, and I'm going to create. Excuse me, I'm going to create a new MIDI track. My brain had a little moment there, but that's okay. I'm just going to drag it to the top. This is another thing I never really talked about, but you can drag, if you click on the title of your track, click and drag, you can move your tracks around, to be in the order that you want. And if you click on a track and just press backspace, it will get deleted. Be careful, although there's always the undo command, which is wonderful. So yeah, I'm going to make a blank track, and instead of choosing one of these drum kits like we did before, I could always get one of these, but using presets is cool. There's lots of great presets in there, but I want to make something more interesting. I want to make something that's me. I want to make something that's all me. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag in this very top device here, which is called Drum Rack, and you'll see it looks very similar to when we loaded any of the other drum kits, except there's nothing there. Good question, Craig. This is you're not the only person to have asked about that. If you want to get a MIDI keyboard for this purpose, you can kind of spend anything from about 20 quid to hundreds and hundreds. You'll find that there's a lot of the little mini keyboards you can get, like there's Akai make them, and M Audio make them, and loads of people make them. And actually, the little mini USB controllers that'll have maybe a 25 key keyboard and some knobs and sliders and things, they're fine. You find if you're a real keyboard player, you might find that the keyboard action is probably going to be a bit squishy and not very nice. And once you start spending into the hundreds, you'll start to find your keyboard action will be nicer. If they have knobs or faders or sort of controls like that stuff might feel nicer. Some things have quite good integration with Ableton, like for instance, there's ways to have it. So I'm trying to find a good example of what I'm trying to talk about. There are, for instance, when you load up a lot of the preset sounds. I'm just going to find something to load up.
maybe that'll load. Yeah, for instance, a lot of controllers that have, say, 8 knobs on them will have quite a good way of those 8 knobs. Whenever you select an instrument, those 8 knobs would always control these 8 parameters and stuff like that. That's quite useful. I mean, my main answer to your question is that it's an extremely saturated market, and check some reviews, work out how much you want to spend, and make sure nobody on the internet is slating it. But yeah, there's Akai make decent stuff, Novation make decent stuff, and actually Novation, people always have really good things to say about Novation's customer service. I do own a couple of their things, and they work really well. Yeah, but yeah, there's a ton of stuff out there. You'll probably find cheaper stuff will feel cheap, and more expensive stuff will hopefully not feel as cheap. Where was I? I was going to, for the last thing today, just try and make ourselves a little drum kit out of some sounds. So just like anything else, so we've dragged in a drum rack just to go back to the beginnings. We went to drums, drum rack, and that just drags in a completely empty drum rack, and all these empty cells. If you want, you can drag a sample onto them. So I might. This might be. I'm going to take another one of these little samples from my old Korg MS-10. And now this is going to be a bit weird one. So okay, here we go. It's dragged in this sample. The only difference you'll see when you drag a sample, it actually creates simpler. The same instrument we were just using, it creates a simpler. It creates one with a couple of by default. It changes a couple of the settings to how a way that might normally work better for drum sounds. I'm actually going to leave this one alone for a second. I'll just ignore that. I'm going to find another. Oh, there was a hand clap. Okay, it's not a very good hand clap. I just recorded that yesterday. I'm going to drag that onto the D there. I also didn't edit this sample very well, and by default it actually plays them back in what it calls one-shot mode. The only difference with this mode is that basically whenever you play the note, it'll play the whole sample. Even if you only send a very short note, it'll play the whole sample. I'm just going to drag across one bar here. Right click, insert a MIDI clip. Just going to drag it out so it lasts over there. I've got my loop on, just so. Oh, I've got that horrible noise of me speaking. Let's get rid of that. Here we are. I'm just going to press play and double click in here, just so that we can zoom out. There we go. I'm just going to put in some notes so that I can. So that I can hear this. So that's our little hand clap. For starters, I didn't edit it very well, so I'm just going to move this start in so that it starts at the beginning of the audio waveform. It's not the best, but you notice it also. Excuse me while my phone rings. It still has the filter. By default, they leave it switched off, but it's the same. This is literally the same device as we were using a minute ago. So I'm just going to switch that on because and I'm going to make this one of those filter models that has a bit of drive, just because this hand clap sounds a bit weedy. That's a bit nicer. And actually, I'm going to do this, and you'll hear this takes off a bit at the top. My little studio room in the house is not a very nice sounding room at the moment, so I'm still working on that. And also, we never touched on some of these controls here, but because this sampler is only just going to play back the sample at one pitch. Here there's a transpose control. I'm just going to turn it down a bit. And okay, that's not terrible. It's not terrible. I've got some random me shaking some random kitchen implements here. Just going to pick one, drag that onto a thing. This is quite a long sample. I'm just going to use these little markers here to maybe just pick a bit of it. I'm just going to pick one. I'm going to go into the clip and put in some notes just to. And I'm going to go back to our device by clicking down at the bottom here. I'm going to have a little play with it, just see what I can. I might also just change the mode from one shot to classic, because it lets us use this envelope. I'm just going to mess around a little bit until you can really make the. Just going to make it so it's only playing back this really little bit. It's starting to sound a bit like a hi-hat. I'm going to switch this filter on as well so that we can use that. And actually this time I'm going to use the other mode of it. I'll switch over to the controls part. So now you're not hearing anything. But I just want to cut off some of the lower part of the sound so that it's just, there you go. That's starting to sound like it. And just like before with our, let's see, yeah, I'm just going to do some work with the velocity. It's worth noting that these drum racks are also actually incredibly powerful. You can think of each cell, each of these little things where you can drop sounds is almost like a track of its own. So say that this hand clap is sounding a bit dry and wooden and horrible. You can actually drop audio effects directly onto the cells. So now this hand clap, if I drag it onto that cell, then now that hand clap and just that hand clap has an effect on it. And just like anything else, you can put multiple effects. If I want to put some phaser on it, I'm just fiddling with controls slightly at random on this phaser, but there you go. That's lovely. That is what it is. And you can same with anything else. If you've recorded sounds in, you can drag them straight from an audio track. I've deleted all my stuff here, but you can drag them straight from an audio track. Sometimes you have to scroll along to find what. But you can drag things straight from an audio track straight onto one of these cells, and it'll automatically create a simpler instrument for you. Load that sample into it and give you something to play with. I was just gonna I guess my last little thing here. I was gonna show you how you can maybe use this as a drum synthesizer. So I loaded that Korg MS-10 sine wave sound into this first cell earlier on, and at the moment when you trigger it, it does that, and that's rubbish. That's absolutely terrible. I'm very upset with it. So I'm just going to go back to the sample controls for that one. I'm going to change a couple of settings. I'm going to change this playback mode to classic, like we were using before. So back to classic, which looks much more now like what we were playing with before. I'm going to switch the loop back on, and that should now, just plays the thing. The other thing it does by default with the when it loads things into drum things is it puts the release as high as it'll go, which is why I've pressed the button and it's going, because the release is set to 60 seconds, which life is way too short. I'm just going to set the release down to something in the millisecond realm. Okay, so now we have, sounds like a little note. I want it to be a kick drum. and at the moment it's not a kick drum, but we can make it into a kick drum. So I'm going to go back to this drum rack. I'm going to just make sure we've got this selected. I'm going to go over to controls. Well, first, actually, I'm just going to fiddle with this envelope a little bit. Yeah, bringing that sustain down already made it feel a lot more like what I wanted. So here we can see this is our amplitude envelope that we were fiddling with before. There's another thing that you can control with the with an envelope, and you can see you can switch this here where it says amplitude. There's another one that can control the pitch, and if we want to turn this just this thing into a drum sound, a lot of drum sounds essentially they start high pitch and they go down, so they go ooh ooh. You know, that's is it, and so you can do that. You have to click this little box to switch it on. And just like the filter envelope earlier on where there was an amount control, this is all switched off, but it's the same deal. There's an amount here. So I'm just going to start by turning it up a bunch and see what it sounds like. Okay. And weirdly, it's another strange bit of user interface messing around that they've done is that this time they've put the attack, decay, sustain and release controls for this envelope just to the right of it. Over here, above, amplitude, below, and for the pitch one, to the right of it. Don't understand why, it wouldn't have been my choice. But hey, by having this envelope that basically makes the pitch of the sample change over time, it's starting to sound like a kick drum, but it's starting to sound like the tiniest kick drum you've ever heard. What I'm going to do is take the overall pitch of it down. Okay, I quite like that. And I'm actually going to switch this filter on, change it to one of those models that has drive, just because I want to. I just want to drive that, and then sometimes it takes a little bit of messing around with the controls. You can, especially changing the decay time can really mess around with it. But suddenly we've taken what was the tiniest, shortest little sample and turned it into quite a workable kick drum sound. Oh, I don't know what I've done there, but and maybe I want to put in a little equalizer, turn up the low end a bit. Ooh, and turn up the high end a bit. And you know, suddenly quite enjoying this. Alex, does this drum rack map to the Ableton Push? Yes, it does. I'm not sure how how easily I can show you this. I don't have my other camera set up today, but let me just see if I can show you this. I actually have an Ableton Push controller sitting right here. I'll see how well this actually shows up. Actually, why don't I just make myself bigger? There you go. Everybody wants to see this guy a bit more, but you don't see the lights very well because I don't have the power plugged in. But the basic answer is yes. These lights aren't very bright, but you can see that's my kick drum. That's my clap, and if I find where my mouse pointer's gone while I'm holding things up to the camera, yeah, you can see that these are the same positions on the little 4x4 grid. I mean, the push controller for Ableton is really good. I've sort of not been covering it very much in this in these because they are, well, it's quite expensive for starters. I didn't. It has lots of great functionality, but pretty much everything that it does is just, it's a very hands-on way of controlling stuff that Ableton does. But everything you can do with the push, you can do in Ableton anyway. It is very nice. I do enjoy it a lot, but I didn't want to make this a tutorial about using Ableton with push because it costs a few £100, and you know that increases the barrier of entry for everybody trying to follow along. I'm just going to make myself smaller again. There we go. That's better. So yeah, if I've made this little kick drum sound. I'm just going to show you one or two more little things. Feel free to wang me questions if you think there's anything that you really want to know at this point that I've not covered. I do appreciate that my style is a little free-flowing, shall we say. I go in with an idea of what I want to teach you, and I just kind of go with it. Excuse me while I be a bit snotty. But I just wanted to show a little bit of what you can do. You can also you can copy and paste on these. Yeah, you can copy and paste on these racks. So I'm actually going to click and hold down on this little kick drum sound that I made. I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, and I'm going to drag it. I'm just going to drag it into another cell. And just to make sure that I'm editing, you just have to be careful. Especially when you're copying things, I do this a lot, that when it copies it, it still leaves the other one selected. So I'm going to click on this one just to make sure I know what I'm editing. And you can press the little play button. So right now it sounds just the same. I'm going to take the same thing. I'm just going to change the transpose control up a bit. That's all right. I'm going to bring the release down a bit, maybe. That's quite cool. And I'm actually gonna do the same. Hold, copy, drop it somewhere else. I'm dropping these in slightly random places. I'm gonna click on this one, edit it, go in, maybe change the transpose down to sort of -12. And now I've got, you know, that's two passable little zappy tom sounds. Just gonna put a bit of them in. And hey, I'm off on a whole new journey of you know, a new drum kit. And maybe for my last trick, there was a little sample, another sample from my old Carg. Just some white noise there. I'm going to drag that in. Double click to make sure I'm editing that. Go back to the classic mode of doing things. And I'm just going to have a bit of a mess with that. Turn that release way down. A little bit of white noise. Turn that filter on, turn it to one that's got some drive. Have a little fiddle with the volume stuff. And suddenly I've got a snare. I'm going to put that in. Maybe I'm going to make this clap happen a bit less often. So there, out of a few random bits of a few random bits of samples from things around my house, I've made a drum kit. Don't know what this is. This is a bowl and spoon. I'm just sort of doing this quickly now, just being like, okay, this was a bowl. I'm just gonna get that. That sounds quite like a cowbell to me. I quite like that. Just going to leave this in one shot mode because I don't need to mess about with it. Turn the transpose down a bit. Great. Now that sounds in there. There we've got a little sound, and maybe I can play over the top of it with my sound that I made from my voice earlier on. And yeah, we're laughing. And there we have, stuff that was just made out of a few tiny little bits of samples with the amazing sound manipulative capabilities of Ableton. We have something that sounds nothing like what it was originally. I think I'll probably wrap up. I think I can only ramble on for so long. If there's anything people feel like they think I've missed out right now that is something that might be quite useful for you, I think because we covered sort of how to make different clips and sort of arrange stuff in the last one, I feel like we can take what you learned in the last one, add in some of these sort of manipulative skills and effects and things that can hopefully help you develop what you've been doing. There are definitely some things that I haven't really covered, but I think there's always things I haven't covered. But I think I'll leave things till next week. I think next week I'd like to maybe look into some things with automation and things like this. And the way that you can change all sorts of controls and the way that you can control Ableton with hardware controllers. I think I'll try and have a look into that for next week. I do know that not everybody will necessarily have something, but you can also you can control quite a lot of things just from your computer keyboard as well. And that's actually one of the things that's amazing about Ableton is how easy it is to control aspects of it from external devices, MIDI keyboards, that sort of thing, which can give it a really hands-on feel, rather than just sitting, clicking a mouse. So I think next week some of that, some automation, maybe some basic sort of mixing stuff, with the idea that you can take what we've learned and create something from start to finish, try and make it sound all right, and yeah. I think I'll sign off now. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, because I really have. I will also note I did get sent a piece of music from Alex that he made from last week, and it was great. I really enjoyed it. If anyone wants to even just share via the Facebook event or something, if you've made anything. I haven't actually shown you how to mix stuff down out of Ableton, but there is an export audio option. Obviously managed to work it out. You can basically, if you have stuff in the arrangement, you can set the loop brace to the start and end of the song and go export audio. Yeah, if anyone wants to work out a good way of us sharing stuff, if anyone has anything they'd like to share, maybe we can work out a way of doing that. Otherwise, I'll have a think about that. We can talk via the Facebook event, and I think I'll sign off for now and go and have some beans on toast. And yeah, hopefully come back next week, and everyone can be making amazing music. Really excited to know, especially if you start recording weird things around your house and turning them into interesting stuff. Really into that. I really love what you can do with manipulating sound. I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to finish this coffee and get on with the rest of my day. Stay safe, everyone, and see you next week.